Okay, in this video, we're going to have a look at the data validation on this cell. And let's assume, as we explained earlier, we only want somebody to be able to enter a single letter, from A to F. So A, B, C, D, E, or F. And the way we do that is we click on the data validation option. Let's go to our settings. And now what we basically is we're going to select the option to allow a list, right? And when it asks us what is the list, we put each value separated by comma. So we say A, comma B, comma C, comma D, comma E, and F. So each one of those separated by commas represents possible values. Now there's two things you'll notice here. It says ignore blank, which means that if somebody enters in a blank, it will allow it. It's not going to stop somebody from entering a blank. That's why the ignore blank is ticked on. And you'll see what the cell drop-down option means in cell drop-down. So the moment I click on OK, you'll see this little arrow that appears here, and that's the cell drop-down. Because when somebody clicks on it, it'll actually give them all the different options, and they can just select an option. So they can just say D, and it automatically selects D. Remember, I only did the data validation on this particular cell. What the blank thing means, allow blanks, is that if somebody deletes the cell, so let's say I delete it, it actually allows one to delete it. I can also copy and paste this down. So if I copy the cell, let's say I copied across these few, you can actually see that the data validation is also copied because the cell drop downs are also copied over there. So each one has a cell drop down. Now, if I did the data validation without the cell drop down, it would work exactly the same way, but they wouldn't be able to click on this drop down. So let's have a look at that. So let's say I said click on data validation, and I said no cell drop down, and I said okay. Now it looks like a normal cell, but there's still validation, because if somebody basically puts in a Z, it gives an error message. This is the default error message, which we should change. As we showed in a previous video, it won't allow them to basically put in anything besides A to F. If I put in an S, same issue. So I just press escape, and I now actually make that error message more clear. So we go to the error alert, and we say on the error alert, performance grade, please enter a letter from A to F. If I click on OK now, and I now type in an incorrect letter, let's say we typed in an X, you can see it tells you please enter a letter from A to F, and that title performance grade is what sits here on the top. Okay, so that's how basically the error works. But remember, always recommend that when you do have a data validation, especially when there's no drop down, because a drop down in itself like this does indicate to the user that there is something there, but it's very good practice to always add the input message. So going in here and saying, performance grade, whatever title you want to give it, and say please enter a letter from A to F indicating the performance grade. If I say OK, you can see now this yellow box is there. So it's copied on this one. So even though there's no drop down selected here, they know what to do. In a particular case like this, I would not only have the input message, I would also basically have the drop down. So it's good practice to maybe have both here. So now they can actually click on the drop down and they can select it. They can also type it in. Remember, the drop down isn't mandatory. So even though there is a drop down option here, somebody could just type in D, or E, or whatever, right? So remember that when we did the data validation, the input message, we only did it on this particular cell, so it's not on these other cells. Now, if you want to copy the same data validation rule from one cell to the other cells, what I want to show you is you can basically use the paste special formula. So if I click that, and let's say I highlighted this area, and I go Control-Alt-V, remember that's the paste special shortcut, I could actually select this option here of validation. So when I copy that, it's not going to copy the value of E, but it'll copy the data validation rules to all of these cells. And if I click on OK, you can see now that when I click on each of these cells, they all have the drop down, and they all basically have the, up to that point is where I copied up till there, they all have the input message and they have the drop down option as well. So that's how you can copy using the paste special feature to copy just the data validation rules. Now, one of the things you may want to do is you may enter a validation rule later, right? So let's just do some errors here. Let's say this was X, but remember these things were entered before the data validation rules were entered. So now if I come in now after the event, right, and I say, okay, I want to copy this data validation rules to all of these items that are above, I can actually do that by using the same function of the paste special. So I click Control C. I'm using my shortcut of Control Shift and up to highlight the whole range, and then I'm using Control Alt and V to basically paste the data validation. So I select the validation option over there and I say OK. Now it's not going to do validation on values that were already entered. So you're not going to, because this X was entered before the data validation rule was applied to the cell, you're not going to see that. What you can do in a case like this is that if you click on this drop down here next to data validation, you can ask it to circle invalid data. And if I select that option, you can see it immediately circle the X and the B because it's picking up that those data are effectively invalid. And similarly, remember from our early video, these ones were warnings. They weren't actually forcing the rule, but they're also invalid because this one wasn't a number between 20,000 and 100,000. And this particular one was also a number that was over 100,000. So you can immediately see in cases where the data was previously entered that the rule is not actually being applied, or if it's just a warning where it allows somebody to enter something that doesn't meet the data validation rules, but allows the person to still continue. But by using this particular feature of highlighting, of circling the invalid data, you can see where there are issues. If you want to clear those circles, remember the circles do not actually do anything to the data itself. It's just highlighting issues for you. And if you want to get rid of them, you just click on clear the validation circles. It doesn't do anything to change the data itself.